finally, the West Virginia Mountaineers pick up a victory in conference play. That actually wasn't the button that I wanted to touch. I wanted to bring you some dance music, Mountaineer faithful, because the West Virginia Mountaineers pick up a victory over number 14 TCU. Jamie Dixon, the Horned Frogs, still winless at the Coliseum, and West Virginia gets off the snide, picking up their first conference win of the year. 0-5 conference start, still a problem, but on this night, the Mountaineers get the win. I'm Mike Asti, that's Ethan Bock, live on location at the Coliseum to experience the win, experience that atmosphere. We have our coverage at West Virginia Sports Now and also all throughout our family of networks about this win for West Virginia. So, Ethan, this looked like a game West Virginia was going to comfortably run away with early on. And Vegas had West Virginia favored in this game that some thought, myself included, was kind of strange because West Virginia had lost 5 in a row. TCU coming off of a win over Kansas State, even though they lost 2 out of their last 3 overall. But yet it looked like West Virginia was going to run away. It looked like they were kind of playing like they did prior to conference play, like they were the better roster, like they were the better team, like it was a problem for TCU, and it was a tougher thing to deal with than a weekend at your in-laws, to kind of paraphrase the famous line that's always thrown out there after Mountaineer wins. But then TCU crept up back in this game, and the end of the game problems crept back up again for West Virginia, and they almost blew this game, which I got to tell you, and I think you would agree, would have been a catastrophe as an understatement, almost to the point that the season really would have been over vibe-wise. West Virginia gets the win, though. So how did they get the big lead? Why did they squander it? And then how did they end up hanging on for the win at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think if you were at the Coliseum tonight, it was pretty noticeable right away that the energy level from this team, especially in the first 2, 3, 4 minutes of the game, it was like we were back in non-conference play. It was not like the first 5 games at all.
Right.
The entire bench was up and jumping, and that's from Hugs all the way down to the trainers and the stats people. Like everybody was excited. Everybody wanted to see the team get off to a fast start, and they did. I mean, they were up 18 with a minute left in the first half. TCU obviously brought it all the way back down to 2 points with 5 minutes left behind Mike Miles. And the fact that West Virginia still won this game without making a field goal in the final 3 minutes and with Trey Mitchell fouling out, it's incredible. It would have been the end of the year if they lost tonight. They wouldn't have been able to come back.
I don't
think
able
to come back from that.
No, I don't think we're even exaggerating. And you hate to say that because we're in January. So it would have been a really rough final month and a half. And just until their last loss, they were still actually getting predicted for the NCAA tournament. So you would imagine at minimum they would still probably get an NIT. But as you know, it would have been the worst vibe imaginable around the program. And they likely would have lost right away when the NIT started if they were there, because it would have been hard to sell to anyone to care. 0-6 in conference play would have been really rough. But yeah, as you mentioned, they end up with the win. And the weirdest thing when you look at the overall spread here, I just had to do a double take because I looked at this at halftime and West Virginia was flirting with 80% field goal wise. They actually end up losing the field goal battle altogether and bring it all the way down to 46.3, TCU at 52.4. Otherwise, West Virginia pretty much won every category. But as you mentioned, they cratered that and ended up a big lead to losing it altogether, despite eventually still obviously winning in total points. And that just speaks to how bad it was in those final 3 minutes, no?
No, yeah. West Virginia, like we said, or like you said, they won pretty much every statistical category. They came out shooting
again
80% again.
Yeah.
It was like the Baylor game last week. They pretty much won every statistical category, but the free throws, the very couple free throws that they missed in that game costed them. Tonight they shot 77% from the line. Kedron Johnson shot 10 of 10. Like that's I wouldn't have been able to imagine saying that a player on this team could shoot 10 of 10
Yeah.
perfect from the line. And then West Virginia was just able to take advantage of TCU's turnovers, and they were also able to get second chance points. So there was more weight that West Virginia was pulling tonight. I think more than what we've seen in the past with the stats and the box scores.
Yeah. Ethan Bock, Mike Asti here, WV Sports Now, for Ethan's game recap, post-game coverage, also here on this YouTube channel, all throughout our network. West Virginia does get the win, 74-65. Their first conference victory, as insane as that sounds. They still are 1-5 in conference play and a hole to dig out of, but a must-win as an understatement, because you have an even tougher opponent, a top 10 team in Texas coming up, and that won't be easy, and they could certainly easily drop that game, but this game at least keeps the season alive a little bit here, as it was on life support, regardless of what will happen on Saturday. You mentioned free throws. Yeah, almost 77%, 20 for 26 to be exact. And you can make an argument, because we've talked about this in every post-game show. We brought this up throughout our coverage. You certainly have. Wow, West Virginia has had their problems in conference play, and it maybe is just the atmosphere. It might have just kind of been a funk around the team. We've talked about maybe it was even a mental thing after losing the Jose Perez appeal and knowing that he wasn't going to be part of this team. It led to Larry Harrison, longtime assistant, certainly with the program, but also even longer under Bob Huggins, being really shockingly dismissed. And obviously that's something that he has an issue with. The program didn't really give him the ceremony that maybe you would normally give an accomplished coach like that. They bring in a new, younger assistant coach who's maybe picking up the vibe a little bit for this team. And all of that went on. I mean, really, if somebody would have told you going into January that they're going to lose 5 straight in conference play, fire Larry Harrison, and the players and fans are going to all get negative again, Ethan, I don't know if you could have believed it when you were watching that team prior to conference play. Like, even one win prior to that 0-5 probably would have maybe saved Larry Harrison's job, and all this might not have went down the way it did, but maybe it'll revitalize this team. But the point I was trying to make, they played well at times, even though not well enough, clearly, certainly more in the more recent out of in conference games. So the first 2 really bad. They shouldn't have lost those, but outside of Kansas, you mentioned Baylor. They did pick it up and played better. They're winning a lot of categories, but free throws was always still a problem. Free throws not a problem in this game. You could boil down to, if they would have been better free throw wise, it wouldn't have been good, but they probably would have at least won 2 of those 5 conference losses prior to tonight, which would totally change the dynamic of this situation, because TCU, I'll get to this in a moment. I know you want to mention this. Probably overrated on the season. They got all the way to number 14. They did beat Kansas State at number 11, but they lost a couple prior to that to non-ranked teams. They lose this game. It's a bad loss, obviously, despite on the road. Who knows what you really want to think of TCU? But, having 3 conference wins going into the night despite a bad loss is a much better feeling than 0 for 5. And now number 7 coming up. So it could have boiled down to maybe just free throws recently.
Yeah, I would say so. They would, other than the Kansas game, they had a shot to win the other 4 games that they lost so far. Oklahoma State, all that momentum was killed once Stevenson got the technical. Kansas State, they just had too many guys in foul trouble by the time they got into overtime. The Baylor game, it was just another case of free throws missing. And same with Oklahoma State or Oklahoma, they couldn't get over the hump in Norman.
Yeah.
So to be able to come in tonight and start out up 18 in the first half, that was the biggest key. They couldn't have fallen back in the first half and then have to go and climb over the hump again. So for them to get off on a fast start was the key to the game easily.
Yeah, and I also think, for as much as some have questioned the mental fortitude of this team, myself included recently, certainly for how they kind of unraveled at the end of games and have lost all of their conference games prior to this one against TCU, you could make an argument that you got to give credit where it's due. To have an 18-point lead over a number 14 ranked opponent, certainly history between Bob Huggins and Jamie Dixon. You're in a must-win desperation time, a new assistant on the floor. could certainly have unraveled and let it just completely collapse if you weren't a mentally strong team. So maybe there's mental strength there that they have somehow found again to be able to hang on and still get the win, even though you almost blew it. Like if they had the mental play of a week ago, they would have lost this game, even with an early lead. There is a different vibe around this team, and mentally they were able to withstand a storm by the Horned Frogs at the end, which maybe would have killed them in recent weeks, and still able to get the win again. They do beat TCU. They do get a conference win, so that is something that actually has now got on the board for West Virginia, although it doesn't get much easier coming up. You didn't expect it to in Big 12 conference play, but they did lose some of the games that should have been cushions when you're facing these ranked opponents, so they got one coming up as well. Ethan Bock, Mike Asti. Now, what I do want to get to is how to kind of take away this win and what to make of it. It's obviously a big win for West Virginia, and it doesn't really matter because they had to get the win. But does this win tell you that this West Virginia team does have a potential they haven't been meeting? They can actually get back in the swing of things in the Big 12. They can still make a run. Joe Lunardi and company weren't ridiculous for projections they were making for this team as recent as 2 weeks ago. Or does it maybe expose TCU as a bit overrated and West Virginia could easily turn around and get the doors blown off against another ranked opponent?
I think it shows that West Virginia has the opportunity to get back into the hunt. Joe Lunardi had West Virginia out as first four out the other day. So I'm assuming he'll probably jump them back as an 11 seed, maybe a 10 seed at best. I mean, this is a good win. It's a top 15 win. That's a fact. They won by 9 points as well. That's gonna look
Cover
good on
the
the computers.
spread. Doesn't matter what you think of TCU. They were ranked number 14. All that's a resume builder for sure.
Yeah, but West Virginia just need to get a win. Like, it's a poor analysis. We've talked about this. It's poor analysis, but they just needed to get a win just to boost their confidence. Now you host number 7 Texas on Saturday. I think they can beat Texas at home. I really do. Like, they can. There's only one team in the entire league I don't think West Virginia can compete with, home or away, and that's Kansas. I think they can compete with any team at home in Morgantown in the Big 12. But yeah, it was big for them to get this win. Now they roll into another home game with Texas on Saturday, then a road game in Lubbock next Wednesday. So maybe this is the start of a winning streak. Maybe they can use the home momentum to their advantage. I don't know, but they got to win tonight. That's all that matters, and it's a good win at that.
Yeah, it's a very, very good win, a necessary win, but also for what's coming up. You do have number 7 Texas coming up, and we'll get to previewing that game and others here before the end of the show in a moment. But then Texas Tech, then Auburn out of conference, number 16, TCU again, Oklahoma, Iowa State, Texas, Baylor. All but 2 of those teams currently have rankings, and TCU is obviously going to drop, but you figure maybe still stay in the top 25, you'd imagine. So it's not going to be easy for the Mountaineers. But again, they lost those cushion games they maybe should have had as wins to kind of buffer this. It's going to be rough. They knew it was going to be rough, but they have a potential to be able to beat anybody out of all those teams I mentioned. Really, the potential, if they play like they did in this game against TCU and hit these free throws and build a lead and hang on, even though they had the rough final 3 minutes, if they even play half as good as they did prior to that in those final 3 minutes and build a better end of game, then yeah, they could pretty much beat anybody. What I do want to ask you, Ethan, now is a little bit of commentary from Bob Huggins' post-game press conference, because a couple things I did find interesting. He, number one, called out a new player as the leader of this team, which we talked about all season long, that Bob Huggins eventually kind of gave the baton to Eric Stevenson, fifth-year senior. He clearly wanted to be a leader. Bob Huggins then would go to him before timeouts, go to him when the team was mentally collapsing and say, hey, tell the team this. He would treat him as the leader and called him that in press conferences. But then Eric Stevenson got in the doghouse. He mentally unraveled at the end of games. He basically cost them the game against Kansas State. He certainly has got out over that now and played well tonight. I don't know if it's to send a message to Eric or if something else has occurred. Somebody else has stepped up. Maybe he doesn't want to just hand the baton over to anybody again, depending on age. But he does say somebody else. is now the leader of this team? And then just what else did you take away from Bob Huggins' post-game comments? Because they're always interesting. And weirdly enough, after recent games, certainly against Oklahoma losing by 1, he was very optimistic about it. Almost came off from Bob that we're going to get a win. We showed me in this game we are good. We just happened to lose. He wasn't as down or negative as he was in the other conference losses. So then you finally do get a big win. You'd imagine Bob maybe got some validation for how positive he was after the Oklahoma loss.
Yeah, Hugs tabbed Kedrian Johnson as this team's leader now. And I don't think that's a knock on Eric at all. I think Kedrian's been a leader of this team. I think he's a guy that the younger players and the newer players have looked up to. And I mean, he's been here for 3 years. He's the only player that stayed for the last 3 seasons. So I understand why Hugs is calling him a leader. I don't think that's a knock on Eric. I think Emmett Matthews is also a leader too. Those 3 right there just play a different role of being a leader. Eric's vocal, Emmett's quiet, but at the same time, Emmett knows how to deal with certain situations.
You can have more than one leader, right? You can.
Yeah. So, but Hugs said Kedrian's the new leader, or not the new leader, but he is a leader. It gets confusing because
that might be a dig at Eric. Then if you do that, like football, like in the NFL, that would be funny.
But I mean, Kedrian showed tonight that both offensively and defensively that he can run this team, and that's something that we haven't really seen from him the first 2 years that he was here. And I think he's getting used to kind of getting in that role of just continuing to improve.
He should know Huggins the best, right?
He should.
Right.
Him and Emmett Matthews should know Huggins the best, just being here for 3-4 seasons each.
Yeah.
Other thing, Huggins was optimistic again tonight. I think he knows that this team's good. I think it's different from last year when he was apologizing to the state every single time they lost.
Yeah, he knew it wasn't going to get better, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah, he knew. I think he knows this team can compete with any team in the country. I think he knows that. But yeah, he was optimistic again. I think he's looking forward to seeing how kind of this new team is, especially with DerMarr Johnson right next to him on the bench now.
Yeah.
He talked about how DerMarr can recruit the DC area well, and everybody knows him in the area. So I think Huggins is actually he's really looking forward to the future of West Virginia basketball.
It could almost be that the firing of Larry Harrison kind of maybe revitalized Huggins in a way. And again, Huggins has said it wasn't in any way just his decision. He's not trying to drag Larry through the mud by any means, but it, I'm sure, was difficult in a way to either hear, be part of a decision, know it was coming, etc., just for the long relationship that they had, regardless of what people may speculate that relationship is now versus what it was. And any brotherhood or friendship, you're going to have some arguments. So you don't know what the tipping point ended up being. But at the end of the day, it was about the best interest of Mountaineer basketball. That's what it was sold by the program, by Bob Huggins, by everybody. And even Larry Harrison said that. He said he was told that this is about the best interest of Mountaineer basketball. Somebody clearly believes it. So, yeah, maybe the program, maybe Hugs, maybe the AD and Ren Baker, maybe these players, maybe they do kind of believe it, even though obviously they all love Larry Harrison in a way, certainly the players. And it also could be that maybe that was the kick in the pants they needed. Maybe it almost, we see a lot in sports sometimes. I mean, this happens a lot more recently than it did throughout sports history, where a team can fire a head coach mid-season and end up, still fighting for a championship. That's not normally what we're used to, but sometimes it actually does give the players a kick in the pants that they basically realize, hey, we're actually good. We let this guy down. Let's not have this season be completely ruined. We can actually make something out of this. So maybe that will kind of spark this team. Maybe that was the goal of this. Maybe it was to send a message that, hey, no one is safe here. We can't just lose every year. I don't care what type of recognition we're getting for Hall of Fame, etc. We are better than this. Maybe unlike last year where they didn't really believe they were better. Huggins didn't believe it. It felt like they should be better. They played better teams out of conference play. They were hanging with them. The way they're playing, their experience, their athleticism, etc., ability to hit shots, all that should be better than they've been in the last 5 games prior to this one. But again, they get a win. It's much needed, but they do get the conference win. DerMarr Johnson able to be part of this game, able to coach in this game, able to get on the floor with this team in this game. Hasn't been there that long, obviously. Was brought in 20 years younger than Larry Harrison, who has the resume, but DerMarr has the ability to recruit, former player, all the professional experience, drafted into the NBA, etc. So going to get respected by players for sure. They may love Larry, but they're also going to like this guy. It seems like that was the reaction. What type of atmosphere was maybe around him? Did you know anything from him or able to speak to him? Obviously, an assistant coach can only impact so much, obviously, but you're not going to get the conversation you normally would get with Hugs. But what was it like to have him out there at the Coliseum?
Yeah, it was kind of odd not seeing Larry Harrison out there, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, the entire time I've covered the team, he's been here, and he's been here way, way before I even started covering.
Yeah, the entire time I've been a student, covered the team as well, and I'm obviously older than you. Right, yeah, it's generational, sure.
So I'm sure everybody felt that way, but DerMarr it was just a different energy out here. It just felt younger. It just felt like,
which is good.
The page has turned, a new era began. He was working with Eric Stevenson, Joe Toussaint, Adrian Johnson, all the guards before the game, talking to Jose Perez and obviously Coach Huggins and his family. He's just getting accustomed to his first week in Morgantown. He just got the paperwork done today, and he got his office today. So he's still getting used to. He's just still getting used to the facilities in the area. So, but for him to coach tonight and help out, and Coach Huggins said he's already helped out. He shot a bunch of shots from the logo, I guess, and shoot around today, and all the players are just watching him. He said he drained like 5 in a row. So it's just for somebody to be able to relate to playing with Coach Huggins. Obviously, you already have Alex Ruoff as a grad assistant, and you have many managers that have been on Huggins' staff before, but just to have another guy from Cincinnati to one of Huggins' Cincinnati guys.
Yeah, there's a Huggins connection, right? Yeah.
Yeah, there's another Huggins connection. DerMarr was recruited by him as a top-rated player in the country in the late '90s, so he can relate to anything dealing with Hugs, and then hopefully he can motivate and inspire these guys to want to play professional basketball and go into coaching as well.
Yeah, and one thing Huggins has done in recent years, even though obviously the last 3 or 4 years have not been what the career resume of Huggins normally dictates in terms of a chance at deep runs, contention, conference tournament, NCAA tournament, it's to be desired. Last year was obviously really, really bad. I mean, arguably the worst season Huggins has maybe had in decades, if not ever. But he's still been able to churn players to professional basketball. Everyone knows Javon Carter and Deuce McBride, but there are others that are making money playing basketball. So that's also part of what DerMarr can sell to these players that, hey, not only NBA, but there's certainly many other places to make money. I did it. It wasn't like he was 16 years in the NBA. So he can help get them to where they want to be. That may also help with the transfer portal and bringing players in like this team did this year, but Eric Stevenson and company, they're not going to be back next year, so they're going to have to go back in the portal. And having a guy who's only 42 versus 62, I mean, 42 versus 62, that's a complete different generational situation. Even when you're 42, you're still clearly older than these college kids you're recruiting, but you can probably relate to them a little bit more. Like you maybe are listening to similar music to them. You can remember when you were their age a little sooner. You may be able to actually hit shots and play with them and have some fun. Whereas Larry's days of shooting the rock are kind of behind him, certainly from the logo. So
it's also DerMarr's. It's also his first. It's his first true assistant
and
coaching
he's hungry.
job.
Right, he's hungry for it. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Coach Huggins is really excited about the recruiting. That's the biggest takeaway from this. Is he's really excited about the future of their DMV recruiting just because of DerMarr. Like Huggins said, everybody knows who he is when they go into the DC area, and I get it. I mean, he was an All-American who played in that area in the late '90s. Yeah. I mean, it's 20 years ago, but at the same time, like,
oh yeah,
you're gonna still remember him. Like he's hungry. Like,
and if you don't, the player's father probably remembers him. Like, you know what I mean? Like, somebody's going to be able to say, hey, like, you might not know who he is because obviously this doesn't carry the name of LeBron or somebody like that who was doing it back then. But he certainly got it done. He certainly can teach you. He didn't become a basketball Hall of Famer, but he certainly is able to tell you how to get to the pros, and he had success, etc. And when you think about it, the recruiting also – that's kind of what sold me on the hire. Not only the youth, the exuberance, and be able to create that younger vibe, which I do think the program needed, but the recruiting. That's big because you have two major media markets that West Virginia is covered by or near regionally. Everyone knows Pittsburgh. We're a Pittsburgh-based media company. We're Pittsburgh media. Everyone knows that. But recruiting-wise for basketball, you're not really going to get much from the Pittsburgh, the Western PA area. It's not like football. I mean, you have occasionally some players, but that's not going to help WVU really. DC, on the other hand, brings a lot of basketball history. I mean, Kevin Durant, it starts there and goes all the way down. It has tons of basketball history. It's also within your region of network of coverage. It could be beefed up. It shouldn't be ignored. They should do better there. And again, not only that, but in the portal, having a younger, experienced player who's now very hungry because, let's be honest, he might not be, who knows? Maybe he'll do this as long as Huggins does it. Maybe after Huggins retires, he'll want to go elsewhere. Maybe if he really has success recruiting, he'll want to get a head coach job someday. Maybe he'll move on. I mean, there's a lot more in his career that's there. Maybe it's not a destination for him at West Virginia. Maybe it's a stepping stone somewhere else. But even if that's the case, he can do a lot of good things while he is there right now. Ethan Bock, Mike Asti here. The WVU does get the win over TCU, their first of conference play. So Texas coming up, they're ranked number 7 in the country. And they've had some big wins this season, to say the least. Gonzaga way back, but they've been good since. What does West Virginia need to do to be able to get another staple conference win? Only their second overall in conference play, but this would be a big one. If you're only going to win 2, you might as well get 2 to top 15 ranked teams back to back. But can they do it? It's at home. What do they have to do to beat the Longhorns?
They just got to do what they did tonight. They just have to use the home momentum to their advantage, and now they can use the game tonight as momentum and as motivation as well going into Saturday. I mean, Texas is talented. They have one of the best backcourts in the country with Marcus Carr and Tyrese Hunter.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're going to have to contain those guys in some way. A key that West Virginia did tonight that really helped them was limiting TCU's fast break opportunities. They're one of the best teams in the country. I think they are number 1 in pacing in the country as well. So just being able to contain the entire team, not have your turnovers go and immediately turn into 2 or 3 points, and have them use numbers to their advantage. It was the key why West Virginia won tonight. So they can do the same with Texas, because Texas is another fast-paced team.
Yeah.
Like I said, they play small. They have a lot of good guards. Marcus Carr, Tyrese Hunter, Serge Jabari Rice, Dylan Mitchell as well. So it's going to be a tough task for West Virginia. Texas is a really talented team. Despite Chris Beard getting fired midseason, they are still on a roll. They're not going anywhere.
Right.
They're a top 10, 15 team in the country for sure, if not a top 5 at their peak. So West Virginia's going to have their hands full again. They're going to have to show up on Saturday. They're going to almost have to play perfect basketball. I think they can get it done, though. Like I said, they can compete with any team in the Big 12 at home other than Kansas. So the 8 other teams, I know they have a chance.
Right. I mean, the game against Kansas didn't really show that West Virginia can compete against them, but who knows? They've beaten Kansas in past years with worse rosters and Kansas being better, but who knows? Yeah, Kansas is probably a bar too high. Texas is coming off a loss to Iowa State, so they certainly can be beat. They're not a perfect team. This is a game in West Virginia. That's a far travel for Texas. Maybe they're a little down. They also could be really, really hungry. So West Virginia's entering this game feeling themselves, finally feeling some confidence and realizing what they can be and where their potential is. That's all a positive for the Mountaineers. They also now got a blueprint of, hey, let's watch this film. This is how you do it. Just play like this again. It sounds simple. Like we said last show, they just need to get a win. And now we're saying they just need to play like this again. Yeah, that's why we get paid the big bucks. Very simple analysis, but it's really accurate at this point for West Virginia. Any other takeaways from this game? Obviously, we're going to have your whole takeaways piece on the site here in the coming days, but any other takeaways from this win? It was a needed win here, to say the very least, for the Mountaineers. They do get one over TCU. Any comments even from Jamie Dixon? I know he said congrats to West Virginia and called them the better team, and all those sound bites that I'm sure stick in his craw going back to his Pitt days. And just Jose Perez being out there, I'm kind of surprised he's still with this team, still a part of shoot-arounds, talking to DerMarr. Is there maybe a turning of the tide, even from his tweet in our coverage recently, that maybe DerMarr could help sell this man on actually coming back next year? Because it always was a thought that if he didn't win this appeal, that would be it. You don't know the player you're getting after a year off, but is there any difference of thought that, okay, he actually might come back next year as well? And maybe the entire vibe around this team that was so down, now a new assistant, a conference win, feels like Jose might come back. Huggins happier. The media is writing some positive coverage because now they got some positive things to talk about. One night, really maybe 2 or 3 nights, have totally changed dynamic around this team that maybe they're back on track.
Yeah, biggest takeaway I haven't mentioned yet is that Trey Mitchell, Eric Stevenson, Joe Toussaint, they didn't shoot that great. They didn't score a lot of points, but they were in that 5 to 10 range. But Jimmy Bell, 15 points, 5 of 7 shooting, 12 rebounds.
Yeah.
He played incredible. Like this was his best game as a Mountaineer. It was his most complete game as a Mountaineer. If they could get this Jimmy Bell every game, they would be a top 10 team in the country. that is no doubt.
Is that the Ethan Bock hot take? Is that the Bock?
That's a hot take.
Okay.
That's a hot take.
That's a hot one,
it's going to be hard to get that Jimmy Bell every single game though. It's not
right.
That's not going to happen naturally.
Right.
But he had an edge tonight. I mean, he was telling the media how he was getting text messages throughout the week that his matchup Eddie Lampkin was the best center in the Big 12. So he was hungry. He was determined to prove those people wrong, and he put up a double-double, 15 and 12. So that was my biggest takeaway. And then just a little side note on Jose, I am as well surprised that he's kind of sticking with it. I don't think he was going to leave. He seemed very positive on staying at West Virginia and sticking it out till next year. I'm just kind of surprised that anybody in his situation would want to stick it out till next year. Yeah. But credit to Jose. If he does decide to stay, that's awesome. He's been through a lot this year, so he deserves to get on the floor and play for a season at a Power 5 level again. So
yeah.
And if he decides to leave, then that's his decision. I mean, like I said, he's been through a lot. So whatever he wants to do, it's whatever he thinks is the best decision. But I'm just shocked. If he did want to leave, I think he would have left already. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I guess I kind of thought the way it would play out, and this again would be no disrespect to him, just how maybe I would want it to play out if I was him. I maybe would go to the program and say, let me just go home and then we'll discuss it again in April or May. Like, I'll be at the school, but I just don't want to be at shoot-arounds, and let me just kind of be myself. If I got to be at practice, okay, but like, let me away from the situation and away from media coverage. I don't want to be in pictures anymore, etc. But no, that's not how he's going about it. He's still on Twitter. He's still out there. He's still with the team. He's still part of the team. So you almost feel bad for him more because he is handling it very mature. That I don't know if I would want to. Yeah, I think I would maybe ask, let me just go away, and then I have the eligibility year left. Let me think about it. Call me in May or whatever when we know your season's over, and then we'll discuss it then. And God bless on if he would try to transfer to play another season elsewhere. But the NCAA has pretty much made it clear he has that one more year left, or who knows what he wants to do. But maybe he now has some advice. Maybe there can be some, maybe at the very least there can be some mentorship between DerMarr and him, that DerMarr can say, hey, if you want to make money playing basketball, this is your best course of action. I get how you were screwed, but maybe he needs that mentorship from someone. Again, love Larry Anderson for what he did, but maybe having somebody in there who's closer to the age of these players, even if he's 2 decades older, he's much closer to their age. That is maybe something that they really needed even if they didn't realize it. And even if they were mad at the time of Harrison's firing, maybe now they realize the benefit of having somebody who is closer to their generation, and you can actually, go on YouTube and find clips of this man playing. It's not too long ago. So the Mountaineers do get the win. It also does make you wonder, Ethan, as we wrap up the show, the vibe that you saw in this win, the atmosphere around this win. You mentioned Bell and others getting really into the game and being motivated and wanting to do it to prove doubters wrong, etc. Where was that the previous 5 games? Because as much as they could fight and get back in there, as much as they're probably still going to get in the NCAA tournament if they hang into it and hold water the rest of the season, they can beat anybody. Certainly they would beat Texas. If you do all this and then had some of those wins against teams you certainly should have beat, even if you still lost to Kansas and Baylor, again, you're a ranked team. You're a top 15 team. You're a top 5, 4 seed like people thought they could be months ago. Nonetheless, though, the Mountaineers do get their first conference win, so you can sing Country Roads on this night, finally, if you can remember the words. 74-65. Regulation, they hang on. They had a big lead. They hang on at the end. Didn't play great at the end, but they get the win nonetheless. So you can celebrate this one until Saturday when it won't get any easier. Texas coming up from the Coliseum, number 7 Texas against the Mountaineers, who desperately need their second conference win.